Atheist Alliance International podcast.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Atheist Alliance International podcast. I'm Jason Sylvester, aka Diogenes of Mayberry, your host, and joining us this week is Lawrence Krauss. But just before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody to like and subscribe. So, as many of you may know, Lawrence is a scientist, an author, professor, and he's got a new book coming out. He's also the founder and director of the Origins Project, so he's here to talk about his interests and his new book. So thank you, Lawrence, for joining us today.
Well, it's nice to be with you virtually across the world.
Yeah, yes. So maybe just for our viewers who are not familiar with the Origins Project, maybe just give us a quick intro about what that's all about.
Sure. The Origins Project Foundation is a nonprofit foundation that was created in 2018. And the purpose is to kind of do a variety of things, but basically merge science and culture under the presumption, the true presumption, that science is an essential part of our lives in almost every way and plays a role in public policy and culture. We try to connect people with in principle, with people who are at the forefront of ideas across the cultural spectrum. So we run a podcast, and we have people from the Nobel laureates to well-known writers and directors and artists, and so we cross the gamut of human intellectual activity, because science is fascinating and vital, and also we want to inspire people to think about the issues that really will affect our future in the 21st century. So prepare people in some sense to participate in things that improve our lives in the 21st century. So there's the podcast. We also run travel experiences. We just got back from Greenland,
Cool.
And Iceland, a trip with my friend Richard Dawkins, and also with Nobel Prize winning physicist Barry Barish. And we run public events. We just ran our first public event because of the pandemic. We've been delayed 2 years in Phoenix, so we ran two sets of one again, a dialogue with Richard on stage, and also a wonderful night of cosmology with 3 Nobel Prize winning physicists. So and we're hoping to do programs around the world. We've done one in Iceland. Actually, we did a public lecture in Iceland, and we hope to do events and partner with people around the world to bring the most exciting people around, so people can interact with them either for a long time, as in the travel experiences, or for a short time in an evening where you can ask questions. And it's been fun, and it's wonderful to see the spectrum of people who've agreed to participate, and how we can impact lives around the world.
Cool. So, as many people probably know, as you mentioned, science is quite fascinating. I myself am a huge science, especially of astronomy. I'm a huge astronomy fan. I watch all of the programs. I know I've seen you on many documentaries. But as you know, you are also on the Advisory Council of AAI. So was the Origins Project partly inspired by events in the U.S., like the fuss by the American evangelicals about creation in the classroom? Or?
Well, the Origins Project is to get people to sort of be excited about the world the way it really is, and that's really the heart of it. That's what science is all about. So of course it's involved with fighting, with responding to ignorance and superstition and bias, and secular religion as well as regular religion. Its main purpose is not to combat religion so much as to get people excited about reality, about the real world, so they don't need all the nonsense. And so part of it has been the real desire that to have any kind of functioning democracy, you have to have people who are not necessarily scientifically literate in a deep sense, but since science affects all those things, all those decisions from health, education, security, energy, and governance in terms of how we behave as individuals, it's really important to expose people to those ideas and get people to be excited by them. And so, we try and have people who can respond to the nonsense that's happening around the world, so people can get a good idea of what it's really like. And part of that, of course, is religious nonsense. And I mean, in that sense, both standard religion and what has been more recently something I've been worried about, which is kind of secular religion.
So what do you mean by secular religion?
Well, I think of religion as sort of things that taking things on faith without evidence, and religion, of course, is a big part of it. But there are many things that there are many things you can't say that are heretical, and no, nothing should be sacred. I guess that's the point. And if people hold certain ideas as sacred and say this is the case, whether or not you think it's the case, but you can't even question it, then that's the enemy of science, the enemy of learning, the enemy of freedom, and of course religion has played a large part of that in the last 2 millennia and beyond. But so is other things where people are claiming that there's systemic racism in for example in science departments without any evidence, or the fact that men are naturally entitled in all sorts of situations. Or, I mean, look, the point is you got to be able to question things. And there's assertions that are made in popular culture now. And I could touch many hot button issues from gender to other things. And the point is we should be able to have a discussion about those. And when people cut off discussions, say this is an idea that can't be questioned, that's what I mean by secular religion. Just as people do that in the case of the old-fashioned God, where they say you can't question the God's existence. It's there, and anything you say is heretical, or you can have a discussion about it. So I view the lines of those things as blurring of late, perhaps because one of the reasons is that regular religion is sort of dying in many ways. I think many people still feel the need to believe in things. And they pick up other ideas.
It almost sounds like you're talking about this epidemic of wokeness, particularly in academia. That this creeping leftist atmosphere that is choking off academia from people being able to think critically and express differing opinions. So. Yeah,
and I don't necessarily. It's not all leftists. It happens on both sides of the spectrum. But you're right. A lot of the wokeness it does come from the left, but this creeping notion that, you can't question anything, and people and faculty, I've written about faculty who've been removed for questioning, just having meetings about gender, or another faculty member I wrote, was removed from his position at Berea College for basically writing a survey on hostile work environments. He's a psychologist. Said it created a hostile work environment to ask questions about hostile work environments. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. And so, I actually participated last year in a Oxford Student Union public, one of these debates they have, the Oxford Debating Society, the Student Union. The question was, everyone is religious. And a number of my well-known atheist colleagues were on the other side. I actually took the side of, yes, everyone's religious. My argument was, if people weren't naturally religious, we wouldn't need science. If people didn't want to believe, in the sense of Fox Mulder and the X-Files, then we wouldn't. Then science would just come naturally. That you'd say, okay, I won't accept things without evidence. But we all, for various reasons, I think we have this innate willingness to believe things we want to believe in, and science gives us the tools to fight that. And again, that's part of what I try and purvey with the Origins Project Foundation, is the tools of science, so people can use them in everyday life.
At the risk of potentially insulting you, you sound like our fellow Canadian Jordan Peterson, and his points that we're all religious, or there are no real true atheists.
Yeah, well, look, I've talked to Jordan a number of times, as you know, and we agree on some things and disagree on others. And I think he takes religion a little too seriously as part of his. Well, he just has this love affair with myth, and elevates it to some kind of primal level that I think is a little beyond the pale. But I think he and I fight together a lot of the wokeness that's happening in Canada, and I do it in the States as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the awe and the wonder of science, and you mentioned Richard Dawkins. I'm reminded of a quote of his. I believe it's from A Devil's Chaplain, where he talks about that creationism is downright boring compared to the mind-expanding, staggering truth. I apologize if I mixed that up a little bit, but that was a quote that really resonated with me.
Yeah. Actually, he said something similar, and he wrote the afterword for my book, A Universe from Nothing, and basically said something similar. And I think it's true. The real world is far more interesting than any of the myths or fictions people come up with. It's even more interesting in science fiction, because the imagination in nature far exceeds human imagination. And so, yeah, the real story of the universe, which I write about in my books and speak about, is so much more interesting than the kind of quaint and often violent tales of religious sacred books. They're just so limited in their imagination, and it is fascinating to experience the real world. And I think that's why and Richard and I have had this discussion for 20 years. That's why I think the way to get people to, and I don't want to use the word wake up anymore, but the way to get people to confront their misconceptions and beliefs is to look and discover the wonders of the real world. And that's why I spend so much time on it. When provoked by the wonders of reality, or the magic of reality, as Richard might have said, I think it's easier for people to say, well, look, these old myths just don't do it for me anymore.
Yeah. There's I don't know if you've seen it. There's it's out on YouTube with your colleague Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he's asked what's the most astounding truth, and he talks about how that we're all made of stardust, and that's how we're all connected to the universe. So you're right. I mean, I totally agree that the Big Bang and the nucleosynthesis, and how at least 2 stars had a supernova in our galactic neighborhood for us to have
in our bodies. And I mean, it goes beyond that. Neil and I, by the way, just did our second podcast recently, so you can listen to it. And both Neil and I borrow that phrase in some sense from Carl Sagan and before. Actually, for Richard Dawkins years ago, I think probably one of the things that got the most well known among the atheists was when I gave a lecture on a universe from nothing, and I gave that quote that we're all stardust, that the atoms in your left hand and the atoms in your right hand may have come from a different star, and then I ended it with an offhand remark that said, "Forget Jesus, the stars died, so we'd be born."
I've seen that quote, yeah.
And it was just, anyway, it's become a meme. But it is really one of the most fascinating things I know. It means we're intimately connected to the cosmos. Every atom in our body was inside a star that exploded and experienced one of the most violent fireworks in the universe. And how amazing is that?
Yeah. Yeah, I studied business, but I had an elective in astronomy, and I remember studying nucleosynthesis, and it was just amazing. It was just such an eye-opening concept to be exposed to that.
Here's another eye-opening concept that'll blow your mind if you haven't heard me talk about it before, or someone else. I was just talking about it with Barry Barish on one of our public events. So, yeah, every atom in our body came from stars and stuff. But even more exciting, if you wear any gold, do you wear any gold? Do you have a gold wedding ring or anything like that?
I used to, but it got I had a gold chain that got stolen. But I don't. Well, I am married, but I don't have a wedding ring.
Yeah, but anyway, we didn't know where gold comes from, because gold isn't created in stars, because the stars only create elements up to iron. In supernova, even then, it wasn't clear they would create heavy elements. So it was a big mystery. It was speculated that what happened when 2 objects called neutron stars, which are stars that have collapsed but not to black holes, are amazingly dense. They're the mass of the sun but the size of Tokyo, and each teaspoon weighs billions and billions of tons. And they're essentially huge single atoms, if you want, and nuclei, huge single nuclei of atoms. And they can be orbiting around one another, and they can collide. And even though it's unbelievably rare events happen all the time in the universe. And it was speculated when they collide that maybe that's where gold is formed. And then when the LIGO gravitational wave detectors came online, they discovered several black holes that were colliding, but they saw the collision of neutron stars as well. And then they looked at and then with other telescopes, we looked at the aftermath of those collisions and saw the gamma rays from radioactive elements. And in one in particular, they saw, in fact, 2 Earth masses of gold was created in that collision. And so every time if you have a gold wedding ring or a gold chain, that was created by the collision of 2 neutron stars. That's even wilder than being produced in the core of our sun. And it made its way to you. I mean, that's amazing to me.
Yeah. I remember seeing that on one of the documentaries recently, because when I studied astronomy 30 years ago, it was, the elements were made in a supernova, and then it's like, okay, no, they only make up to a certain level.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, there's some past iron that are made in supernova, but it wasn't clear if you made enough of the trans iron elements, and now we know, and now we know in the sense that we've been able to empirically verify it, because science is empirical. I'm a theoretical physicist, but you need experiments and tests to be able to call it science. And I just so every that's just an amazing fact, an amazing discovery. We have new window every time we open a new window on the universe. We're surprised, and with the LIGO telescope, we open it up, and then every time they see a burst of gravitational waves, all these other telescopes look for optical or gamma rays or X-ray events in the same area, and now we can look at things we never thought we'd be able to see.
Yeah. Are you inspired by this new era? We have James Webb. The Artemis was launched a week or two ago. Are you excited about these new horizons?
How can you not be excited? I mean, I think Richard said that. Someone said, "Are you excited by science?" How can you not be excited by science? How can you not be excited by these new opportunities? Yeah, James Webb. I've been writing about it and speaking about it, and we actually at the event we had recently, we had John Mather, who was the sort of chief scientist on James Webb. He had won the Nobel Prize for other things, and he talked about the most recent events of that week. And every week there are new things coming with James Webb. So of course it's exciting. Artemis is kind of fun too. It's not a lot of science. It's getting people on the moon is more for adventure than science. I'm not a big. I mean, I think it's fun to put people in space, although they tend to die. But not all the time, but sometimes. Yeah. But the best science we do doesn't involve people, and so I sure it's neat to think of going to the moon and such. I think Mars is a little far fetched in the near term, but we shouldn't confuse that with science, because the science that's done by humans in space is like that. It's compared to the science that's done by satellites and remote.
But it pushes the boundaries. We get some new engineering evolutions.
It's great. We got new engineering. We excite young people. When I was young, I watched the moon landings. I stayed home from school. We got Tang, as I remember. I don't know if you remember what that was, but it was.
I remember Tang.
Orange juice. It was the dehydrated foods we got. But yeah, no. Of course, every time you spend a lot of money on a technical project, whether it's a spacecraft or the Large Hadron Collider or something else, there are tremendous tons of technological side benefits. You don't want to justify your project because of that. Sometimes people do, and I think it's unfortunate. But every time we push the boundaries of technology, whether it's gravitational wave detectors or a spacecraft, we're going to have technological side benefits that come from that.
Yeah. Okay, and you've got a new book coming out. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and when it's due out.
A little bit. Yeah, it doesn't come out till May, and we can meet again in May when it comes out. But it's called. Well, it has two titles, as is often the case in English, because the British publishers and American publishers tend to have different predilections for what they think is reasonable. But it's in England, in the UK, and all the countries that the UK goes out to in English, Australia, India, it's called The Known Unknowns, The Unsolved Mysteries of the Cosmos. And then in the United States, it's called The Edge of Knowledge, Unsolved Mysteries of the Cosmos. And the reason being that the known unknowns comes from a quote of Donald Rumsfeld, who you may remember.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's one of his great quotes. I'm not a big fan of the man, but he made a good quote. And but the American publishers decided that maybe it was a little too, people would object too much to a quote from Donald Rumsfeld, so they wanted to change the name. I wouldn't have, but anyway, I still like The Edge of Knowledge too. So, and anyway, both of them come out, I think, May 9th and May 11th of 2023. Just finished the final set of revisions of proofs a week or two ago, and be recording the audiobook sometime in February or March. And the book is about what we know we don't know about the universe. That's why it's called The Known Unknowns. And it's a really apt title because, as Rumsfeld said, there are things we know, and then there's things we know we don't know, and then there's things we don't know we don't know. The things we don't know are really the most exciting, but I can't write a book about them. If I did, they wouldn't be. It'd be a pretty short book. But the things we know we don't know are what drive us as scientists in some sense. So it takes us to the edge of knowledge, and it has 5 sections: time, space, matter, life, and consciousness. The sort of the frontiers of the universe and understanding of universe and science. and it was quite fun to write about them. It's sort of in some ways a natural descendant of my book, A Universe from Nothing, which addressed sort of the big questions at the beginning of the universe, and this takes us on, and it's exciting to think of what we might learn and what we might know, but it takes. You have to know something to know what we don't know, and that's what I want. I wanted to bring people to the forefront of mystery.
So things that we know we don't know, like dark matter, dark energy, or what is
and those
consciousness.
are kind of simple things, but we don't. You know, that did time have a beginning? Are we alone in the universe? But are the four forces of nature the only forces we know? Is quantum mechanics fundamental? All sorts of questions, and then how did life originate? What is consciousness? All sorts of, the kind of questions in some ways that everyone asks themselves. Not all of them, because you require some scientific sophistication to ask themselves, why do we live in a universe of matter? That question's been around, and most people don't think of it as something they wake up every morning and ask the question of. It seems kind of natural. But if, in fact, naturally, it's very unnatural, because you would expect there to be no matter in the universe, because a universe would have equal amounts of matter and antimatter at early times. They would annihilate and produce pure radiation. So why do we have a universe of matter and not antimatter? That question really is what drove particle physicists like me into cosmology 45, 50 years ago. We still haven't answered that question. We have a lot of hints, but we haven't empirically answered that question. But so there are varying levels of questions that really are fundamental, some of which, as I say, every one of us ask every day when you look up at the night sky, are we alone? Or wonder how we originated, or how life originated, and those kind of questions. Or wonder when you see the color green, or the same thing other people see when they see the color green, if, unlike me, you're not colorblind.
So you say, but does time have a beginning? I remember seeing a documentary recently, or an article recently, speculating that there was no sort of singularity at the Big Bang, that it was just an energy field prior to the what we term as the Big Bang. So is that what you mean by does time have a beginning? Because there would have been time elapsing while there was an energy field. There just was no space-time.
No, I don't know what they mean by an energy field. People say a lot of things, and in fact, a lot of things in response to my book, where I argue that our universe can spontaneously arise out of nothing, and that includes space and time. So there may not have been time before our universe, as Stephen Hawking has said, and I say, we agree there. And therefore, the question, what happened before our universe, may not even be a good question, if time began then. But maybe it didn't. And those are the kind of questions you have to ask. But when one said there was an energy field, I don't know what people mean by that. People throw a lot of words around. And some of those words, they relate to my book when they talk about a quantum vacuum. And I don't think they really, they object to the idea, to the very notion that an entire universe full of 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars or so, could come out of nothing spontaneously without supernatural shenanigans. And therefore they say there must be something wrong with that idea, and they try and redefine things that I try to be pretty careful to define, like nothing. And that's the fascinating thing about modern science. It turns out nothing and something are not that different, because nothing turns into something all the time due to the quantum mechanics. So we have to redefine our notions of our concepts, and that's okay. That's called learning. That's all right. Some people object. They say he's redefining what you mean, and I say, well, that's because we've learned something, Anyway.
And so what are your theories then on the Big Bang?
Well, as I say, I've written books about it, but the Big Bang happened, and there's no doubt about that. But
like the beforehand, like, do you?
Well,
was it a singularity?
We don't know the answer, and that's one of the. I begin the new book by pointing out, saying we don't know. I don't know is one of the most exciting and wonderful things you can say in science. It's not embarrassment. It means there's more to learn. We don't know because we don't have a theory of quantum gravity, which really is required to talk about the very beginning of time. But my best guess is the one I presented in with a lot of evidence in my book, Universe from Nothing, that space times can, if gravity is a quantum theory, space and time can spontaneously come into existence like particles can within space, and so whole universes can pop into existence. Most of them disappear very quickly, but some of them can survive. And if we asked what would be the characteristics of a universe that spontaneously rose from nothing and survived for 14 billion years, those would be just the characteristics of the universe in which we live, apparently. That doesn't prove it's the case, but it's highly suggestive. And then the question is, well, okay, great. It's our space-time arose. What existed before, or if there's a before, and then, that in some sense that's really irrelevant because our space didn't exist, our space and time didn't exist, and then it did. Whether anything else existed is irrelevant because it's not part of our universe. But then as I talk about in the new book, and again we had Alan Guth on with our last public event. He developed the idea of cosmic inflation. But our current picture is that probably there are many universes, and universes are, if you wish, are he calls them pocket universes. Most of space is expanding so fast you can't even imagine it. But every now and then, like a seed, like a snowflake, a universe decouples from that expansion, and you have what the sort of the Big Bang that we've seen, and the picture of inflation is that goes on forever in general, and so it could be that there are universes totally removed from us, or we'd never be able to see them. They're causally disconnected from us, but they could be coming into existence right now, and other universes could be ending, and the laws of physics could be different in each one, and all of those things are fascinating to speculate about.
Right. And do you think science will ever develop a way where we can interact with one of these multiverses?
No, because they are causally disconnected. But science can come up with ways where we can have evidence that they exist. Indirect evidence, just like we knew atoms existed before we could ever see them. As my colleague and I, Frank Wilczek, showed a bunch of years ago, if you can measure these things called gravitational waves from inflation, you can show that gravity is a quantum theory, first of all. But secondly, you could probe the features of inflation. And from there, you could tell whether it was eternal. And if it was eternal, we then would know that there are other universes. So we can indirectly know of their existence, but we'll never be able to interact with them directly. And we won't have aliens coming to visit us from them, or like Star Trek episodes or anything like that.
Okay. Interesting. So,
yeah, I mean, it's nice because if we could measure this, we could turn metaphysics into physics. And I always view, anytime you can turn metaphysics into physics, you've done something good.
So what do you have an idea of what sort of the next great breakthrough is going to be, or it'll just be a surprise? Oh, no one thought this was coming, and here it is.
Well, I always say when people ask me that question, if I knew what the next big thing was, I'd be working on it, wouldn't I? But that's the point. Well, we can anticipate that's what the modern book is about. It's all the many things we really don't know, but we can anticipate. Might happen or might be possible, and some of those there will be breakthroughs in the coming years. So in some sense, the new book is a preview of maybe of some possibilities for existence. And my hope, just like Sir James Jeans wrote a wonderful book almost 100 years ago called The Mysterious Universe, and it's kind of quaint to read it now. My hope is if people read my book, not even 100 years from now, but 30 years from now or 50 years from now, that it will seem quaint by comparison as well, because the things we don't know are fascinating. But as I say, the things that are more exciting are the discoveries we didn't anticipate at all. And every time we open a new window on the universe, we're surprised. So I expect that the real universe will be more surprising than even the mysteries that I discuss in my new book.
Yeah, I rewatched the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan a few years ago, and I was pleasantly surprised at how much has changed. Like the theories that have been advanced, that we know now how old the universe is, and the cosmic microwave background radiation map that they did. It was really quite cool to see the evolution from I think it was 1980 when he did it to now. So, and how we keep pushing these frontiers. And as we said, it's fascinating and awesome.
Well, I was a young assistant professor at Yale in the 80s and early 90s, and I remember talking to a rather distinguished astronomy colleague of mine who said, well, the universe will conspire so that we'll never, ever be able to measure fundamental quantities like age or its geometry, because it seemed that way. Every time someone claimed they'd made a measurement, it turned out some astrophysical uncertainties obviated the measurement and meant it wasn't real. But he really felt that way, and that was in in the mid 80s, and of course everything's changed. We can now measure these properties that he thought would be unmeasurable to sometimes 5 significant digits. The universe has changed so much since even then that it's hard to believe. Which is really the reason I wrote The Universe from Nothing, which was to celebrate the last 50 years of amazement. And amazing discovery, and that's what that book was all about. How our picture of the universe has changed in the last 50 years.
Great. Okay. Well, I know you have to run. You've got another appointment, so we should probably wrap it up here. Maybe in May, when your book comes out, we can reconnect again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that. You can look at it. You'll be quizzed, and
I'll definitely read it.
Talk about it. But it's exciting, and I'm happy to say that some of my favorite people have written lovely blurbs for the book. People from my friend Stephen Fry, who's written something wonderful to Lord Martin Rees and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Noam Chomsky and others. So it was really gratifying that they seem to enjoy it. So I hope people like you will as well.
Oh, I'm sure I will.
Well, keep up the good work there. And it was fun to talk to you across the world, and we'll talk again.
Great. So thank you for your time and coming on. And I'd like to remind everybody to please like and subscribe, and we'll see everybody on the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International, and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. See you next time.